Hey everybody, Mr. Duker back again of Super Simplified Social Studies, and today doing a video on the French and Indian War. Doing it a little differently than before. Instead of having kind of like the notes and the text on the screen, I thought I would try this time and do things a little differently, like a lot of other YouTube channels I know of do, and just have images with narration over them. Still the same content, but maybe it's a little easier to view if I present it this way. So let me know what you think, if you prefer to have just the images or if you want the text from the other videos. Doesn't matter to me. I'm just trying something different here. But the French and Indian War is very important, especially for world history, but especially for American history as well. It's a war between the English colonies and the French and their Native American allies. And it's important, as we'll see, because of the major consequences from this conflict. The effects of this war will be felt for years to come, right? So jumping into it, once the 13 colonies had been established, they grew pretty quickly and very fast. Colonists are already moving westward, as you can see, moving out west to get access to new land, to new resources, less crowded spaces. That's why many of them came here in the first place, is access to new lands. But you have to remember that the English colonists are not the only ones here. The French also had been busy and had claimed a lot of land in Canada and also in the interior. Now, the French got along pretty good with the Native Americans. The French really weren't so much building huge cities and colonizing these territories, so much as they were just using them for resources. A lot of trapping and fur trading was going on. And instead of building cities, as you could see, the French were building forts. Forts is what each side would kind of use in the frontier to claim land. You can look and point at a map and say this territory is yours all you want. But unless you actually have like forces on the ground actually claiming that, it doesn't really exist. So to claim land, both sides would build little forts all over the place. And as long as you kind of had soldiers there, that land was kind of under your control, your protection. Again, the Native Americans who live there be damned. They're kind of being pushed out here already. But a lot of forts are being built. And what we see in these years before the French and Indian War is a lot of small, what they call colonial wars. A lot of small little conflicts breaking out between the French and the English, fighting for access to good hunting grounds, river access, things like that. But already we are seeing that this is land that is worth fighting and dying for to get access to these valuable resources. But again, these are all fairly small. They're over pretty quickly. But it was common to have violence in the frontier as both sides are fighting for control of this area. The French and Indian War, when it breaks out, is going to be kind of like a small colonial war that quickly blows up and will become something much, much bigger. But again, these colonial wars kind of set the stage for what happens next. And when we get to the French and Indian War, well, that started with one man and one man only, George Washington. George Washington is instrumental in the beginning of the French and Indian War. You have to go back a little bit. So young George Washington is a very ambitious man, and he wants to be, more than anything else, he wants to be like a gentleman, right? A gentleman was a type of a social class back at this time that were respected and wealthy, and you had kind of made it. They owned land, they had business, a gentleman is what you wanted to be. It was kind of part of the elite. And so one of the quickest ways to become a gentleman during this time, if you weren't already, was to be like an officer in the army. So Washington actually enlists and joins the English army, as you can see here, posing very nicely in his red coat. And to rise in the ranks, Washington volunteered for a kind of dangerous assignment. He was supposed to escort a diplomat, I think a French diplomat, into the backwoods territories, I believe to a location in Ohio. I don't know if it was for a meeting, to sign a treaty, or whatever, but he was supposed to escort, again, a diplomat, like a politician, into the backwoods. And it was a dangerous mission because there were hostile Native Americans who may kind of ambush him, or that could cause some trouble. So Washington volunteers for this dangerous mission. It's really his first time in the field. He really doesn't have any other combat experience. He's maybe read some books and stuff like that, but very common at this time to be put in charge of an army with very little experience. You could pay your way to rise in the ranks if you wanted to. So anyway, this is not uncommon to have inexperienced people leading men into the front line. So the story goes, he is taking his men and escorting this diplomat into the Ohio territory when he is ambushed by Native Americans who don't want him there. Native Americans with a grudge. So Washington kind of panics a little bit. They get fired at. He ends up kind of retreating a ways. And in the middle of in the evening and into the night, he ends up building some very hastily built fortifications to try and protect himself from the coming attack. It's kind of fitting he names this Fort Necessity. You can see right there, Washington's not the greatest Fortnite player, but that's his fort that he built. And in the middle of the night, they tried to kind of wait out this attack and maybe fight their way out in the morning. But like I said, he's not a good Fortnite player because Fort Necessity is built in probably the worst location possible. As you can see, it's in the middle of a clearing. It's kind of in the bottom part of a valley. So the Native Americans have a lot of cover in the woods behind to hide and to observe and to snipe at Washington and his men. He's kind of put himself in the middle as sitting ducks. And it just so happens that night it rained quite a bit. And this little valley ends up getting flooded. And Washington and his men are like up to their knees in water. When the sun comes the next morning, he realizes he's kind of been played. And he surrenders, which again is a common formal thing in the military at this time. So Washington, does a formal surrender to the Native Americans. The story goes, though, at this point, one of the Native Americans who was looking to cause trouble kind of rushes out during the surrendering ceremony, attacks the diplomat, and caves his head open, killing this guy in front of everybody. And then to make his point, this Native American warrior ends up washing his hands in the diplomat's brains, I guess to put some salt in the wound or to show this guy meant business. Pretty ghastly, but that's the way you sent a message back in the time. So when the surrender was being taken care of, you have to do your paperwork. And so the surrender document was written in a way where George Washington would basically be accepting the blame for the death of this diplomat. Or I think the way it was worded, Washington even had a hand in killing this guy himself. So Washington is given these surrender papers, and there's a problem. The papers are written in French. Now, to be a gentleman at this time, it was expected all gentlemen could read and understand French. Washington cannot. He's embarrassed by this. He doesn't want anybody to know. So you can probably see where this is going. He just pretends to read the document. Oh, yes, this is all great. Very nice. Signs his name at the bottom without reading the fine print and basically says, I, George Washington, personally killed this diplomat I was supposed to protect. Signs his name to it. And that is that. When word gets out back home that George Washington, an English officer, killed a French diplomat that he was supposed to protect, you can imagine the French aren't too happy. And so they will start to fight back and get revenge. And this is the beginning of the French and Indian War, started personally by the first president of the United States, because he couldn't read a contract that was given in front of him. Lesson to be learned, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you always read the fine print. And so this is the start of the French and Indian War, and the war quickly will escalate from a small colonial conflict from a junior officer in Ohio into spilling out into affecting all the colonies and all the French territories in North America. Now, the French and their Native American allies will team up to fight against the English with their colonial help, the militia and stuff back there. And this war goes on for quite a bit. Lots of small skirmishes and fighting for control of the territory. And in the beginning of the war, England actually does pretty poorly. England does not fare very well. But as the war goes on, it gets bigger, and this actually ends up becoming what historians call the 7 Years' War, as England and France take this war that started in North America. It soon spreads around the globe as England and France start to fight on the oceans. They start to fight in Europe, and they start to fight in all their other colonies as well. You could view the 7 Years' War as kind of World War Zero, because that's kind of the scale and the scope of what's going on here. And as the war goes global, France decides to put its attention elsewhere, like on fighting England at home and on the ocean, and they kind of lose track, or they lose interest in what happens in North America. And so that gives England and its colonies some time to kind of regroup and regain the advantage and to end up winning the war in North America. England wins the French and Indian War just because, again, France gets distracted and the war is being fought elsewhere. So that's that. What's important here, though, are fighting wars all around the globe. What's important here, though, are the consequences of the French and Indian War, right? This is what matters. So when it's all said and done, the war is officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, 1763 edition. There are others soon to come. But basically, England comes out pretty well. They end up gaining a lot of territory in the interior. England will gain control of Canada in the interior lands. So they get access to all the good hunting grounds and the fur trading areas. Again, Native Americans who are already there, be damned. They're not taken account of. But those lands are basically now wide open for English settlement, which is what those colonists wanted in the first place, to move out west and start to grow and expand. So now they have the green light because France is gone, and they will quickly start to expand and encroach even more on the Native Americans. That's also why parts of Canada still speaks French today. It goes back to those early French colonies they had established before this time. However, as I said, this is kind of World War Zero. And a consequence is this war is very long. It is very expensive, as wars tend to be. And it ends up bankrupting England, right? They are pretty much broke after fighting this huge war. And so when the war is done, England takes a look around and says, well, wait a minute. This war started in North America. This war was fought to protect the colonists. We sent our soldiers over to fight for them. The colonists are the big winners here because now they're able to expand and get even more wealth from all the resources in these new territories. It only makes sense that because the war was started in the colonies, because it was fought to protect the colonies, and because the colonies gain from all these new lands taken, that they should have to chip in and pay for this war. So you may see where we're going here. But soon afterwards, we will start to see a lot of new taxes put onto the colonies, taxes which were intended to pay for this costly French and Indian War. Again, as you may know, the colonies don't take kindly to these taxes, and that will create a little bit of trouble going on in the very near future, with even more severe consequences to follow. But this is where all the taxes and acts comes from the French and Indian War. So that's a lesson in a video for another time. Hopefully that helped. Hopefully that was super simplified, and hopefully you understand now why the French and Indian War is a big deal, and it's a very important place in American history. But that's all for now. Again, I'm Mr. Duker from Super Simplified Social Studies, and I'll catch you later.